Toxic nostalgia strikes again when fandom turns memory into a weapon. Nostalgia used to be a warm thing, a shared language, a way for generations to meet in the middle and say, "This mattered to me once." Somewhere along the way, though, nostalgia curdled. It hardened into expectation, entitlement, and eventually outrage. In modern fandom, memory is no longer a lens. It is a measuring stick, and nothing new can ever be long enough, pure enough, or faithful enough to pass. What we are seeing again and again is not simply disappointment. It is toxic nostalgia, the belief that a piece of art must recreate the emotional state of the viewer at a specific point in their life, often childhood or early adulthood. That is an impossible demand. Stories change because audiences change, creators change, and time changes everything. Yet fandom often refuses to. Few long-running franchises or prestige television series illustrate this better than the following examples. Let's dig deeper and look at 6 franchises that have been hit hard by this phenomenon. First up is Stranger Things and the impossible wait of 10 years. Stranger Things was never going to win this fight. What began in 2016 as a charming, synth-soaked homage to Spielberg, King, and Amblin-era adventure gradually transformed into a cultural event that demanded more than the show could ever deliver. Over nearly a decade, fans did not simply watch the series. They projected onto it. They grew older, louder, and more entrenched while expecting the show to remain frozen in amber. After 10 years of build-up, expectations became absurd. A coming-out storyline that was telegraphed seasons in advance was somehow treated as both a revelation and an ideological earthquake. For many viewers, it was emotional, necessary, and overdue. For others, it shook the foundations of conservative fandom that had mistaken subtext for absence. Neither reaction had much to do with the quality of the writing itself. It was about ownership. Add to that a retconned mythology of the Upside Down that stripped away some of the unknowable cosmic horror in favor of explanation, and suddenly fans accused the show of betraying its roots. But long-form storytelling demands answers. Mystery without resolution eventually collapses under its own weight. Then there is the most unavoidable problem of all: time. Watching 30-something actors convincingly play teenagers is a suspension of disbelief that can only stretch so far. The show became trapped between wanting to stay emotionally adolescent while being produced by adults who had grown out of that stage of life. Stranger Things did not fail because it was bad television. It failed because it was asked to remain the same show forever while still evolving. Toxic nostalgia made that impossible. Next, Game of Thrones, of course, and the ending no one wanted because no ending ever would have worked. Game of Thrones may be the most frequently cited example of fandom betrayal in modern pop culture, but it is also one of the clearest cases of unrealistic expectation. For nearly a decade, viewers lived in Westeros. They theorized, speculated, and built personal narratives around characters who felt larger than life. The show was not just entertainment, it became a shared obsession, a communal puzzle box. The problem was never simply the 8th season. The problem was that the journey was never supposed to end in a way that made everyone happy. From the very beginning, Game of Thrones was defined by dissatisfaction. Heroes died ignobly. Villains survived far longer than they deserved. Power corrupted absolutely. Yet when the final season delivered controversial character outcomes, many fans acted as though the show had suddenly betrayed its own DNA. Some hated Daenerys' arc. Some hated Jon Snow's fate. Some hated that the ending felt rushed. These criticisms are valid, but the intensity of the backlash was fueled less by narrative flaws and more by grief. Fans were not ready to let go of a world they had invested years of emotional energy into. No finale could have lived up to a decade of fan fiction, theory crafting, and personal expectation. Toxic nostalgia reframed dissatisfaction as outrage, and the show's legacy became inseparable from its ending. Third, we look at The Sopranos and the ending that forced fans to grow up. When The Sopranos cut to black in 2007, audiences were furious. They wanted answers. They wanted resolution. They wanted Tony Soprano's fate spelled out in clear, unmistakable terms. What they got instead was silence. At the time, it felt like a provocation, a cheat, an insult. In hindsight, it was one of the most honest endings in television history. David Chase understood something many fans did not want to accept. The Sopranos was never about closure. It was about cycles, denial, and the illusion of control. The cut to black forced viewers to confront the truth that their need for a satisfying outcome was itself a fantasy. What makes The Sopranos fascinating in the context of toxic nostalgia is how perceptions have shifted. Over time, many of the same viewers who hated the ending now defend it. Distance allowed memory to soften outrage into appreciation. The show was not wrong. The audience simply was not ready. Fourth on the list is Sons of Anarchy. This is an example of excess becoming expectation. By the time Sons of Anarchy reached its 7th season, it had become something close to self-parody. Escalation replaced nuance. Every conflict became bigger, bloodier, and more operatic than the last. An ending was not just inevitable. It was necessary. Jax Teller's final ride was expected. Everyone knew where it was going. That did not make it satisfying. Fans wanted tragedy, but they also wanted meaning. What they got felt hollow to many, less like a culmination and more like exhaustion, finally catching up to a show that had run out of places to go. Here, toxic nostalgia took a different form. Fans did not want Sons of Anarchy to change, but they also wanted it to somehow rediscover the emotional power of its early seasons. That is a contradiction. The show had already burned through its realism, its subtlety, and much of its goodwill. The ending did not fail because it was unexpected. It failed because expectation itself had become unreasonable. No, we didn't forget about Dexter. That's 5th on the list, and every now and then, nostalgia gets a do-over. Few finales were as universally reviled as Dexter's. Lumberjack jokes became shorthand for creative failure. For years, the show's legacy was defined by disappointment. What makes Dexter unique is that it represents one of the rare cases where nostalgia was partially satisfied through revision. The reboot, Dexter New Blood, did what the original finale could not. It reframed the ending, corrected narrative missteps, and offered a conclusion that felt emotionally honest, even if not universally loved. This is an exception, not a rule. Most stories do not get a second chance. And even here, the reboot did not magically erase all criticism. It simply reminded audiences that endings are fragile things, and sometimes time and distance are the only tools capable of repairing them. Last, the toxic fandom that is Star Wars in the eternal no-win scenario, or is that Star Trek? No franchise embodies toxic nostalgia more completely than Star Wars. Anything released after 1983 has been judged against an impossible standard. Fans do not want new stories. They want to feel exactly the way they did when they were 7 years old, sitting in a dark theater, discovering a galaxy far, far away for the first time. That feeling cannot be recreated. If filmmakers attempt to return to the old formula, they are accused of making pale imitations. If they try something new, they are accused of betraying the spirit of the original. Innovation is heresy. Familiarity is laziness. There is no winning move. The result is a franchise trapped in a perpetual identity crisis, where every creative decision is filtered through decades of emotional attachment. Toxic nostalgia ensures that no version of Star Wars can ever be enough, because the audience is chasing a memory, not a movie. The real problem with toxic nostalgia is that at its core, toxic nostalgia is not about art. It is about control. Fandom becomes unhealthy when viewers believe stories exist to preserve their emotional past rather than challenge their present. It demands stasis in a medium defined by change. It mistakes discomfort for failure and growth for betrayal. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. Nothing can make you feel the way you felt the first time. Not because the art is worse, but because you are different now. Expecting otherwise is not just unfair to creators. It is unfair to yourself. Stories end, sometimes poorly, sometimes brilliantly, often somewhere in between. Toxic nostalgia turns that natural process into a battleground where memory is weaponized and disappointment becomes identity. Let stories be flawed. Let them end. Let them fail. The alternative is living forever in the past, screaming at shadows, demanding that art stop time. And time, like a good finale, does not listen.